I'm Rebecca Wilson, 34 years old, born and raised in Boston. Standing in my parents' living room during Grandpa's funeral reception, I watched my brother James bragging loudly about inheriting our family bakery. The room felt suffocating as relatives offered congratulations while I stood silently in the corner. When James finally approached me smirking, he said Grandpa was smart to leave me the bakery. I looked him straight in the eyes and replied calmly, "Did you read the will?" His smug expression instantly faltered. Before I dive into what happened next, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. If you enjoy family drama and sweet revenge stories, hit that subscribe button and like this video to help others find it too. Now let's get into the real story of how my grandfather's last wishes turned my family upside down. Wilson's Sweet Traditions wasn't just a bakery. It was the beating heart of our family for over 70 years. My grandfather, Harold Wilson, established it in 1952 after returning from the Korean War with nothing but his mother's recipe book and a dream. That small corner shop on Maple Street eventually became a Boston institution known for sourdough bread that people would line up for at 5 a.m. and cinnamon rolls that made the local paper declare them worth breaking any diet for. My earliest memories are dusted with flour. When I was barely tall enough to see over the counter, Grandpa Harold would hoist me up onto a special step stool he'd built just for me. "Becca," he'd say, his eyes crinkling at the corners, "you've got the touch. I can see it in the way you handle the dough." By age 6, I could shape perfect dinner rolls. By 10, I had mastered his secret sourdough technique. The bakery was my second home. The place where weekends and school holidays disappeared in clouds of flour and the warm, yeasty scent of rising bread. James, 3 years older than me, couldn't have been more different. While I eagerly absorbed Grandpa's knowledge about fermentation times and the importance of butter temperature, James would sit in the corner office playing video games on his handheld console. When Grandpa tried to interest him in learning the business, James would complain about the early hours, the heat from the ovens, the tedium of kneading dough. "I'm more of a big-picture guy, Grandpa," he'd say. "I'll handle the business side when I'm older, not waste time on the grunt work." Our parents, Thomas and Diane Wilson, never pushed James to take an interest. In fact, they encouraged his dismissive attitude. "James is academically gifted," my mother would say. "He's destined for greater things than flour and sugar." When I'd come home excited about mastering a complicated French pastry technique, my father would nod absently before turning to praise James for his latest A on a math test. The message was clear. My passion was cute, but insignificant. James's future was what really mattered. Despite this, Grandpa Harold continued to nurture my talents. When I announced I wanted to attend culinary school after high school, he was the one who helped me research programs while my parents suggested practical alternatives. When I was accepted to the prestigious Culinary Institute of America, Grandpa drove me to New York himself, helped me settle in, and slipped me an envelope containing $5,000, money he'd been saving for my education without my parents' knowledge. "This bakery will need new blood someday," he told me. "Someone who understands that what we do isn't just about profit margins and quarterly reports. It's about making something with your hands that brings joy to people every single day." After culinary school, I honed my craft at acclaimed pastry kitchens in Paris and San Francisco, eventually returning to Boston to work as head pastry chef at one of the city's finest restaurants. All the while, I'd visit Grandpa regularly, often helping out at the bakery on my days off, introducing new techniques while respecting the traditions that made Wilson special. Meanwhile, James had obtained his MBA and cycled through several corporate marketing jobs, never staying anywhere longer than 2 years. He rarely visited Grandpa except for obligatory holiday appearances. But when Grandpa's health began to decline 3 years ago, James suddenly developed an interest in family legacy. It started with casual comments at family dinners. "The bakery needs to modernize," he'd declare, despite not having set foot in the place for months. We're leaving money on the table with this old-fashioned approach. He began stopping by the bakery to consult with Grandpa, armed with spreadsheets and marketing proposals that would have transformed our beloved neighborhood institution into a soulless chain. Grandpa listened politely, but made few changes. This frustrated James, who complained to our parents that Grandpa was stuck in the past and going to run the business into the ground. My parents always, Team James, agreed that perhaps it was time for younger, more business-savvy leadership. One evening, about 6 months before Grandpa passed, I arrived at the bakery after closing to find him in deep conversation with his lawyer, Michael Brennan. They quickly changed the subject when I entered, but not before I heard Grandpa say firmly, "It's my decision and I've made it. She's the only one who truly understands what this place means." I didn't think much of it at the time, assuming they were discussing some business matter. It was only later watching James prance around at Grandpa's funeral, accepting condolences laced with congratulations on his inheritance, that I realized what that conversation had likely been about. And when James approached me with that smug pronouncement, I knew exactly why Grandpa had been meeting with his lawyer that evening. The day after the funeral, our family gathered at Michael Brennan's law office for the reading of Grandpa's will. The small conference room felt too warm and too tight as we arranged ourselves around the polished mahogany table. James and our parents on one side, me on the other, with our Aunt Patricia, Grandpa's younger sister, taking the chair at the end. James looked confident in his tailored navy suit, occasionally checking his expensive watch, as if he had more important places to be. My mother kept patting his arm reassuringly, while shooting concerned glances my way, as if preparing to console me for the disappointment she assumed was coming. My father sat stiffly, his expression unreadable behind his wire-rimmed glasses. Only Aunt Patricia offered me a small, encouraging smile. When Michael Brennan entered the room, fell silent. He was a tall, distinguished man in his 60s, who had been Grandpa's lawyer and friend for decades. He arranged his papers methodically before looking up at us. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "Harold was very specific about his wishes, and I'll do my best to honor them exactly as he intended." He proceeded through the standard preliminaries: small bequests to distant relatives, charitable donations, specific items going to various friends. James fidgeted impatiently during this part, clearly waiting for the main event. Finally, Michael cleared his throat and reached for a sealed envelope. "Now, regarding Wilson's Sweet Traditions Bakery, the business establishment and property at 247 Maple Street, along with all equipment, recipes, and associated intellectual property." He paused, looking directly at each of us in turn. "Harold Wilson leaves this in its entirety to his granddaughter, Rebecca Wilson." The silence that followed was absolute, lasting perhaps 3 seconds before erupting into chaos. What James shot to his feet, his face flushing red. "There must be some mistake," my mother gasped, pressing her hand to her chest as if physically wounded. My father's mouth opened and closed several times before he managed, "This can't be right." I sat frozen, equally shocked despite my suspicions. Aunt Patricia reached across to squeeze my hand, her eyes shining with what looked like pride. Michael Brennan remained composed, raising a hand to quiet the outbursts. "There is no mistake. Harold was of sound mind and body when he signed this will 6 months ago with 2 independent witnesses present." But he told me, James sputtered, his voice rising. "He always said the bakery would be mine. We had plans. I have a letter from Harold that he asked me to read at this juncture." Michael continued, calmly opening the sealed envelope. "These are his words. To my family, I know my decision regarding the bakery may come as a surprise to some of you. Business acumen is valuable, but Wilson's Sweet Traditions was built on passion, dedication, and a love for the craft that cannot be taught in any business school. Rebecca has inherited not just my recipes, but my belief that food made with love nourishes more than the body. From the moment she could stand on a stool and reach the countertop, she understood what makes our bakery special. She has invested years in perfecting her skills, respecting our traditions, while bringing fresh ideas that will keep us relevant for another generation. James, you have many talents and will succeed in whatever you choose, but your heart has never been in the bakery. It would be unfair to both you and our loyal customers to place Wilson's in hands that don't feel the joy in every loaf. This is not about favorites. It's about ensuring that what I've built continues to thrive in the care of someone who truly understands its soul. Rebecca, I trust you to honor our legacy while making it your own. You've earned this. With love and confidence, Harold Wilson. As Michael finished reading, James slammed his fist on the table. She manipulated him. All those years playing the devoted granddaughter while I was actually building a career. It was a long con. James, my mother, reached for him, but he shrugged her off. This is completely unfair, my father joined in, his voice tight with controlled anger. Rebecca already has a successful career as a chef. She doesn't need the bakery. James has been preparing to take over the business for years. I finally found my voice in between corporate jobs. During the holidays, when you'd stop by for exactly 45 minutes before having somewhere more important to be. You haven't worked a day in that bakery since you were 16. I was focusing on getting the education needed to run it successfully. James shot back. While you were playing with flour and sugar, I was learning actual business skills. The bakery has been successful for 70 years without your MBA spreadsheets, I replied, my hands trembling despite my effort to stay calm. Harold wasn't thinking clearly in his final months, my mother said to Michael, her voice taking on the reasonable tone she used when trying to get her way. Surely there's something we can do to honor his true intentions. Michael Brennan regarded her coolly. Harold Wilson was mentally sharp until the end, Mrs. Wilson. He knew exactly what he was doing. We'll contest it, James declared, pointing at me accusingly. You're not getting away with this, Rebecca. James' Aunt Patricia spoke up for the first time, her normally gentle voice firm. Your grandfather had every right to leave his business to whoever he chose. Rebecca didn't manipulate anyone. Of course you'd take her side, James snapped. You never thought I was good enough either. That's not true, Patricia replied calmly. But I watched how each of you treated your grandfather and his legacy. Actions have consequences. James grabbed his suit jacket from the back of his chair. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. He stormed out the door, slamming behind him. My parents exchanged looks before my father turned to me. I hope you're satisfied. You've torn this family apart. They followed James out, leaving me stunned and hurt. Only Aunt Patricia and Michael remained. Take some time to process this, Michael advised, handing me a folder. These are all the documents you'll need. The keys to the bakery are inside. Call me if you have questions or concerns. As we left the office, Aunt Patricia hugged me tightly. Harold made the right choice, she whispered. Don't let them make you doubt that. I nodded, clutching the folder to my chest. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt a mixture of validation and grief. Validated by Grandpa's faith in me, but grieving the family support I'd probably lost forever. The morning after the will reading, I stood outside Wilson's Sweet Traditions in the pre-dawn darkness, key in hand. For the first time, I wasn't there as Grandpa's helper or granddaughter. I was there as the owner. The weight of that responsibility settled on my shoulders as I unlocked the front door and breathed in the familiar scent of yeast and sugar. Martin Kelly, our head baker who had worked alongside Grandpa for almost 20 years, was already there, the sleeves of his white t-shirt pushed up to reveal flour-dusted forearms. He looked up from the dough he was kneading, his expression guarded. "Morning, Rebecca," he said, his usual warmth noticeably absent. "Good morning, Martin," I replied, hanging my coat on the hook that had always been designated as Grandpa's. The small action felt both right and presumptuous simultaneously. I know this transition is sudden for everyone. I want you to know how much I value your experience and commitment to this place." Martin nodded but said little as I donned an apron and joined him at the workbench. We fell into the familiar rhythm of morning prep, the silence gradually becoming less awkward as we focused on the tasks at hand. By the time the first batch of sourdough went into the ovens, some of the tension had dissipated. When the rest of the staff arrived, 2 assistant bakers, a cashier, and our part-time delivery driver, I called everyone together. "I know you're all wondering about the future of Wilson's." I began trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. "I want to assure you that I intend to honor my grandfather's legacy while making thoughtful updates where needed. Your jobs are secure, and your input will be valued. This is still a family bakery, just with me at the helm now." Their reactions were mixed. Some seemed relieved, others skeptical. Donna, our cashier who had known me since I was a child, gave me an encouraging smile. "Your grandpa would be proud," she said, squeezing my arm. The morning rush began at 6 a.m. sharp, with our regulars lining up for their daily bread and pastries. Most were surprised to see me behind the counter instead of making my usual weekend appearance. As I explained the situation, I noticed something concerning. Many seemed to already have heard rumors about my plans for the bakery. "So you're not turning this into one of those fancy artisanal places with $8 cupcakes?" asked Mrs. Abernathy, who had been buying our rye bread every Tuesday and Thursday for decades. "Or selling to that developer who wants to put in condos?" Mr. Chen from the dry cleaners next door looked worried. "Absolutely not," I assured them, bewildered. "Who told you these things?" Shoulders shrugged. Vague mentions of hearing it around the neighborhood, or someone was saying, but the pattern was clear. Someone had been spreading misinformation, creating uncertainty about the bakery's future under my ownership. By mid-afternoon, I had a pretty good idea who that someone was. I was checking our inventory when our flour supplier Ryan came in for his weekly order meeting. He seemed surprised to see me. "Rebecca, I thought I'd be meeting with James today." I frowned. "James, why would you be meeting with him?" Ryan shifted uncomfortably. "He called yesterday, introduced himself as the new owner of Wilson's. Said he was taking over operations immediately and wanted to discuss some changes to our delivery schedule. Even talked about potentially switching suppliers for some ingredient." My stomach dropped. "Ryan James is not the owner. I am. Grandpa left the bakery to me in his will." "Oh." Ryan's face reddened. "I'm sorry. He was very convincing. Actually, come to think of it, he's been calling for several weeks now, asking questions about our contracts, pricing, that sort of thing. Always presented himself as being involved in the bakery management." This explained the canceled deliveries of our specialty Belgian chocolate and Italian flour that had occurred twice in the past month. At the time, Grandpa had been confused but assumed it was a clerical error. Now I realized it had been James laying groundwork. More discoveries followed. Our espresso machine, only 6 months old, mysteriously malfunctioned. The repair technician found evidence of tampering. Our website went down due to missed payment, though the hosting fees were set up on autopay through the bakery's business account. Small things, but disruptive enough to create problems. Most concerning was the staff's behavior. There was a reticence, a holding back of information that I couldn't quite pinpoint until Martin finally pulled me aside near closing time. "Look, Rebecca, I need to be straight with you," he said, glancing around to ensure we weren't overheard. "James has been approaching staff with job offers. Says he's opening a new bakery across town, wants to bring over experienced people, offering signing bonuses, higher salaries." I felt like I'd been punched. "Has anyone accepted?" Martin shrugged. "No one's officially resigned yet, but Tim and Alicia are considering it. James can be pretty persuasive when he wants to be. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Honestly, we weren't sure who to believe." James told everyone the will reading was a formality, that there was a separate business agreement giving him ownership, said you were trying to cheat him out of his inheritance. Martin had the grace to look embarrassed. I should have known better, but family business can get complicated. That night after closing, I decided to look for Grandpa's special recipe book, a leather-bound journal where he recorded his most successful creations and experiments. It had always been kept in a specific drawer in his office desk. But when I opened the drawer, it wasn't there. Panic rising, I searched the entire office, then the kitchen. Nothing. That book contained decades of irreplaceable knowledge, techniques, and combinations that weren't written down anywhere else. On a hunch, I checked the security camera footage from the past week. Sure enough, 2 days after the funeral, James had let himself in using what must have been a spare key, gone directly to Grandpa's office, and left with something tucked under his jacket. The sabotage wasn't just about making my job difficult. It was about erasing Grandpa's legacy and replacing it with James's version. And he was just getting started. Sunday night dinners had been a Wilson family tradition for as long as I could remember. Even during my years abroad, I'd feel a pang of homesickness every Sunday evening, knowing my family was gathering around my mother's dining table without me. Now, 1 week after taking ownership of the bakery, I almost skipped it. The thought of facing James and my parents made my stomach churn. But avoiding the confrontation wouldn't make it disappear. So at precisely 6 p.m., I arrived at my parents' colonial-style home in Brookline, a bottle of wine in one hand and my grandmother's peach cobbler recipe in the other, a peace offering of sorts. I'd barely crossed the threshold when I sensed the frigid atmosphere. My mother accepted the dessert with a tight smile, and my father offered a curt nod before returning to the living room where I could hear James's voice. "It's just good business sense," he was saying as I entered. "The old model isn't sustainable in today's market." He fell silent when he saw me exchanging a look with my father that made it clear I'd interrupted a private conversation. The air crackled with tension as we moved to the dining room where my mother had set the table with her best china, usually reserved for special occasions or important guests, not ordinary family dinners. The meal began with painful small talk. My parents inquired about the weather, a neighbor's new fence, anything but the elephant in the room. James kept checking his phone, a smirk playing at his lips whenever it buzzed. It wasn't until my mother served the main course that I decided to confront the situation head-on. "Someone canceled our standing order with Bergman's chocolate this week," I said, cutting into my chicken, "and reported a health code violation that doesn't exist. Any idea who might be behind that, James?" My brother's expression remained neutral, but I caught the flash of satisfaction in his eyes. "Sounds like you're having a tough time managing Becca. Running a business is harder than decorating cakes, isn't it?" "I'm managing fine, despite someone's attempts to sabotage me," I replied evenly. "And I know you took Grandpa's recipe book. I want it back." "Rebecca," my mother set down her fork with a clatter. "How dare you accuse your brother of theft? He would never do such a thing." "Actually, I have him on security camera," I said, "along with evidence he's been impersonating the owner to our suppliers." James laughed, leaning back in his chair. "Always so dramatic. I was simply retrieving family property before you changed the locks. As for the suppliers, I was doing you a favor by checking into better pricing." "You should be thanking me." "Is that also why you're trying to poach my staff, offering them jobs at this new bakery you're apparently opening?" My father cleared his throat. "Your brother is pursuing a legitimate business opportunity. There's nothing wrong with that." "A legitimate business opportunity," I repeated incredulously. "He's deliberately trying to undermine Grandpa's bakery, the one that's been in our family for 70 years. "The one that should have gone to him," my mother interjected. "James is the eldest, and he has the business acumen to make it successful. Your grandfather wasn't thinking clearly." The casual dismissal of Grandpa's decision, and by extension my capabilities, Stung more than I wanted to admit. Grandpa knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted someone who cared about the bakery, not just its profit potential. "Don't be naive," Rebecca James said, his tone condescending. "The bakery is a business, not a charity." Grandpa was running it into the ground with his outdated methods. "The place needs modernization expansion. You're too emotionally attached to see that. And you're not attached at all, which is precisely why Grandpa didn't leave it to you," I shot back. James's expression hardened. "Look, I'm trying to be reasonable here. The smart move would be for us to work together. You handle the baking, I'll handle the business. Or, better yet, sell me your share, take the money, and go back to your fancy restaurant job before you run Wilson's into bankruptcy." My father nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Your brother is offering you a very generous solution, Rebecca. You should consider it carefully." I stared at them, the realization dawning that this wasn't a spontaneous conversation. They had planned this ambush, this united front to pressure me into surrendering the bakery. Is that what this dinner was about? A business negotiation disguised as a family meal? No one denied it. My mother had the grace to look slightly ashamed but quickly recovered. "We're just trying to find a solution that works for everyone, dear. A solution that gives James what he wants, you mean." I pushed my plate away, appetite gone. I'm not selling, and I'm not partnering with someone who's actively trying to destroy what Grandpa built. James's facade of reasonableness slipped. "You always were his favorite, weren't you? Poor little Becca following Grandpa around like a puppy while the rest of us had to work for approval. Well, enjoy your inheritance while it lasts. When I open Wilson's new traditions across town, we'll see who the customers prefer." "You can't use the Wilson name," I said, though uncertainty crept into my voice. "It's protected by the business's trademarks." The triumphant smile that spread across James's face sent a chill down my spine. "Actually, I can. Dad and I checked with a lawyer. The trademark protection for Wilson alone is contestable, given that it's our family name. And Grandpa never bothered to trademark most of those precious recipes of his." I turned to my parents, hoping to see some sign of support, but found none. "You're backing him in this. You're helping him compete against Grandpa's bakery." My father adjusted his glasses, a gesture he always made when uncomfortable but committed to his position. "We've offered James some startup capital. It's only fair since you received the entire bakery." "Fair," I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. "There's nothing fair about this." The next morning, I received a call from Aunt Patricia. Her voice was tense. "Rebecca, I need to warn you. Your parents called me last night trying to convince me to talk you into selling to James. They mentioned something about a family meeting with Brennan later this week to discuss options for contesting the will." My heart sank. "They can't actually overturn Grandpa's will, can they? It's unlikely. But they could tie you up in legal battles for months, drain your resources." She paused. "And there's something else." I ran into Martin's wife at the grocery store. She mentioned James has been filing trademark applications for several of Harold's signature recipes under his new business name. I thanked her and immediately called Sarah Chen, a lawyer friend from culinary school who specialized in food business law. Her investigation confirmed my worst fears. James had indeed filed for trademarks on Wilson's famous sourdough, Wilson's cinnamon swirl, and several other signature items, listing himself as the creator and owner. "He's trying to prevent me from selling Grandpa's own recipes," I told Martin, stunned by the audacity of it. "That's not all," Martin replied grimly. "The health inspector showed up this morning while you were at the bank. Said they'd received multiple anonymous complaints about food safety violations. We passed the inspection easily. I ran a tight ship, but the implication was clear. James was attacking from all angles, trying to damage not just the bakery's operations, but its reputation. That afternoon, I learned why my bank appointment had been suddenly canceled. The loan officer called apologetic but firm. "I'm sorry, Miss Wilson, but we've received some concerning information about your business's financial stability. We'll need to put your application on hold until these issues can be resolved." "What concerning information?" I demanded. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the details," she replied, "but it came from a source claiming intimate knowledge of your business practices." That evening, I returned to my apartment to find a folder had been slipped under my door. Inside was evidence my parents had withdrawn $50,000 from their retirement account, the exact amount James would need as a down payment on a commercial property. Paperclipped to the statement was a note in Aunt Patricia's handwriting. "Thought you should know what you're up against. Fight back." I sank to the floor, the folder clutched in my trembling hands. My own family, the people who should have been my strongest supporters, were actively working to ensure my failure. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. For the first time since Grandpa's death, I allowed myself to cry, releasing the grief, anger, and fear I'd been holding back. But as the tears subsided, something else took their place. A steely determination that would have made Grandpa proud. I hadn't spent years perfecting my craft just to be bullied out of my inheritance. If James and my parents wanted a fight, they would get one. But I wouldn't be fighting alone. At 3:15 in the morning, my phone's shrill ring jolted me from sleep. Fumbling in the darkness, I answered to hear Donna's panicked voice. "Rebecca, you need to get to the bakery now. There's water everywhere." I threw on clothes and raced through Boston's empty streets, arriving to find water cascading down the bakery's front steps. Inside it was chaos. 2 inches of water covering the floors, soaking into the bases of our wooden display cases, dripping from the ceiling onto equipment. Martin and our night baker Luis were already there, desperately trying to save what they could. Pipe burst in the wall behind the mixer. Martin explained his clothes soaked through. "I've shut off the main water valve, but the damage." He didn't need to finish. I could see it myself. Our industrial mixers and ovens might survive, but the electrical systems, the wooden cabinetry, the inventory, flour, sugar packaging, all ruined. And we had the Perlman wedding order due tomorrow, a 6-tier cake and 300 custom pastries that the bride had designed with us months ago. I called our insurance company's emergency line while helping the team move salvageable equipment to dry ground. By sunrise, the immediate crisis was somewhat contained, but the reality was stark. We couldn't operate in these conditions. The health department would shut us down immediately, and repairs would take at least a week. I was on the phone with Mrs. Perlman explaining the situation and promising to find a solution for her wedding when James strolled through the front door immaculately dressed and surveying the disaster with poorly concealed satisfaction. "Maintenance problems already. That's unfortunate." His voice carried a note of mock sympathy that made my blood boil. "You know this building is over 60 years old. Grandpa was too stubborn to invest in proper upgrades." I ended my call and faced him. "What do you want, James?" "Just checking on the family business." He stepped carefully around a puddle. "Looks like you're in quite a bind. The Perlman wedding, right? 300 guests, very high-profile Boston family. This could be devastating for your reputation." The specificity of his knowledge sent alarm bells ringing. James shouldn't have known those details unless he'd been monitoring our orders. Or unless you did this, I said, the realization crashing over me. "The pipe didn't just burst. You sabotaged it." James adjusted his tie, neither confirming nor denying. "What matters is your predicament. You can't fulfill the order, but I can help." "How exactly would you help?" "I've been setting up my own commercial kitchen for Wilson's new traditions. It's fully equipped, health department approved, ready to go. You can use it to complete the Perlman order." He paused, letting the offer dangle. "For a reasonable fee, of course. And with proper credit to the actual kitchen that saved the day." The audacity was breathtaking. Create a crisis, then swoop in as the savior. while ensuring the prestigious Perlman family associated their positive experience with his new bakery, not mine. Or, I countered, I could tell the Perlmans exactly why we're having plumbing issues. I'm sure they'd be fascinated to hear about a disgruntled family member's vendetta against their wedding bakery. His smile faltered slightly. That would be your word against mine. And who sounds more credible? The successful businessman offering help or the struggling baker making wild accusations? Before I could respond, the bell above the door jingled as my parents entered. They surveyed the water damage with appropriate expressions of concern, but their eyes held no real surprise. "Oh, Rebecca," my mother sighed, picking her way across the wet floor in her designer boots. "This is exactly what we were worried about. Running a bakery isn't just about decorating pretty cakes. There are serious maintenance issues that require proper management." "Management wasn't the problem," I replied coldly. "Someone deliberately damaged the plumbing. And I think you know who." My father bristled. "That's a serious accusation. James came here to help, and this is how you respond, with unfounded allegations." "They're not unfounded. The plumber already told me the pipe shows signs of tampering. Someone knew exactly where to create maximum damage with minimum evidence." "You're being paranoid," my mother said, exchanging glances with James. "Buildings this old have problems. This is precisely why you should reconsider James's partnership offer. He has the business expertise to handle these issues properly." "This isn't about business expertise," I shot back. "It's about sabotage. And I'm not partnering with someone who would destroy Grandpa's legacy just to get his way." "Be reasonable, Rebecca," my father said, his tone hardening. "You're in over your head. You have no kitchen, a major order due, and repairs that will cost thousands. James is offering a solution to a problem he created." The three of them stared at me with identical expressions of condescending pity, a united front of gaslighting that made me question my own sanity for a split second. The weight of their combined dismissal, not just of my accusations, but of my entire capability as a business owner, crushed down on me like a physical force. Something inside me snapped. "Get out," I said quietly. "All of you. Get out of my bakery." "Rebecca," my mother began. "Get out," I shouted, my voice echoing through the water-damaged space. "You don't care about this place or what it meant to Grandpa. You just want to control it to bend it to your vision regardless of his wishes. Well, I won't let you. This is my bakery now, and I will rebuild it without any of you." James smirked. "Good luck with that, especially when I undercut your prices on every major account you have." He pulled out his phone, showing me a spreadsheet. "Bergman Hotels, Logan Airport, kiosks, the university catering contract. I've already approached them all with better offers. It's just business, Becca. Nothing personal." "It seems very personal from where I'm standing," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. My parents looked uncomfortable but made no move to contradict James. Instead, my father cleared his throat. "We've tried to be supportive, Rebecca, but you're being unreasonable. Sometimes the best way to honor a legacy is to know when to let go." "Supportive?" I laughed bitterly. "You've undermined me at every turn. You're financing my competition. You're trying to steal my clients. That's not support, it's betrayal." "We're trying to help you avoid failure," my mother insisted. "Your stubbornness is the only thing standing in the way of a solution that works for everyone. A solution where James gets everything and I get nothing. How convenient." As they turned to leave, James paused at the door. "My offer stands until noon. After that, you're on your own with the Perlman disaster. Just remember, in business, pride comes before bankruptcy." When they were gone, I sank down onto a relatively dry step, my head in my hands. The enormity of the situation threatened to overwhelm me. The bakery was unoperational. The Perlman order, our biggest of the month, was due in less than 36 hours. and my own family was actively working against me, seemingly willing to cross any ethical line to get their way. Martin sat beside me, his usually cheerful face somber. "What do we do now, boss?" I looked around at the devastation, then at the small team who had rushed to the bakery's aid in the middle of the night, not because it was their job, but because they cared. These people, not my blood relatives, had proven to be my true family in this crisis. "We fight back," I said, standing up with newfound resolve. "And we start by saving the Perlman wedding." The bell above the bakery door jingled as I was mopping up the last of the water. I looked up expecting the insurance adjuster, but instead saw George Hamilton, my grandfather's oldest friend and former business partner from the bakery's early days. At 78, George still stood tall and straight, though he leaned slightly on a handsome wooden cane. "Heard you had some trouble," he said, surveying the damage with keen eyes that missed nothing. "Thought you might need an extra pair of hands. Or ears, at least." I hadn't seen George since the funeral, but his presence immediately lightened the weight on my shoulders. He had been there during the bakery's hardest times, including a devastating fire in the 1,970 seconds that had nearly shuttered the business permanently. If anyone understood rebuilding from disaster, it was George. Over coffee at the diner across the street, our kitchen being unusable, I poured out everything. James's sabotage, my parents' betrayal, the imminent threat of losing major accounts, and the Perlman wedding disaster. George listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or frowning. When I finished, he sat back and regarded me thoughtfully. "Your grandfather faced worse, you know. During the recession of '82, a chain bakery opened up half a block away, slashing prices to drive him out of business. Then there was that developer in the 90 seconds who tried to buy the whole block for condos, turned all the neighbors against him when he wouldn't sell." "What did he do?" I asked. George smiled. "He got creative, found allies, refused to play by rules designed to make him fail." He leaned forward. "First thing we need to do is save this wedding. I still have keys to my son's catering kitchen in Cambridge. It's not huge, but it's commercial grade and health department certified. He's in New York until Tuesday. The space is yours if you want it." The relief was so intense, I almost cried. "George, that would be... I don't know how to thank you." "Thank me by proving James wrong," he replied simply. "Now, about these other issues. You need a lawyer, and not just any lawyer. Someone who understands family business disputes." He made a phone call right there in the diner, speaking briefly, before handing his phone to me. Sarah Chen said, a crisp female voice. "George says you need help with a family business situation." Sarah turned out to be exactly what I needed. A shark in a designer suit who specialized in contentious family business transitions. After a 90-minute consultation at her downtown office, surrounded by impressive credentials and photos of her shaking hands with various politicians, I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. "Your brother's trademark applications are problematic but manageable," she explained, organizing documents into precise stacks. "He's attempting to claim ownership of recipes and processes he didn't create. We can file oppositions and likely prevail, especially with documented evidence of your grandfather's development and use of these recipes over decades." "What about him using the Wilson name for his competing bakery?" Sarah's smile was small but confident. "Family names are tricky, but Wilson's Sweet Traditions as a complete brand is clearly protected. We'll file for an injunction to prevent him using any branding that could create market confusion. And his attempts to poach your accounts by claiming to be the real Wilson's Bakery. That's textbook tortious interference." She named her retainer fee, which made me wince but seemed worth every penny. As I wrote the check, she added, "One more thing. This health inspector, who suddenly appeared after anonymous complaints, I have a contact at the department who can verify if these inspections are being properly initiated. If your brother is abusing the system for harassment, we can address that too. Back at George's son's kitchen, I found Martin and the team had already transported our salvageable ingredients and equipment. They were working with focused intensity scaling recipes to replace what had been lost in the flood. "We've got this," Boss Martin assured me, looking more energized than I'd seen him in weeks. Luis called his cousin, who works at Restaurant Depot. "We've got a line on emergency supplies at cost." Donna's nephew is a plumber already at the bakery, assessing the real damage. And look who showed up. He gestured to the corner where Mia Sandoval, a popular food blogger with over 500,000 followers, was photographing our team at work. She waved when she saw me. "Rebecca, I heard what happened from Donna. The community rallying to save a historic bakery after disaster strikes. That's a story people need to hear." I hesitated, wondering if publicity was wise given the family conflict, but Sarah had advised transparency would work in our favor. So I gave Mia a tour of our emergency kitchen, explained the situation diplomatically, omitting direct accusations against James, and shared our determination to fulfill the Perlman wedding order, despite the setback. "You know," Mia said thoughtfully as she examined a tray of delicate sugar flowers, "these are works of art. Have you ever considered doing a video series on your techniques, your grandfather's traditional methods combined with your modern training? People would eat that up, no pun intended." The idea took root, and by evening we'd recorded the first installment of Traditions and Transformations. Me creating the Perlman wedding cake while explaining Grandpa's special techniques for achieving perfect texture. Mia posted it immediately, tagging it with number Save Wilson's Bakery. By morning, the video had over 50,000 views. Local news picked up the story. Suddenly, the phone was ringing with old customers, offering support, neighboring businesses, offering temporary storage space, even competing bakeries, offering to share kitchen time. The community response was overwhelming. Martin pulled me aside during a rare, quiet moment. "I should tell you, the entire staff has decided to stay. Even Tim and Alicia, who were considering James's offer. What happened here?" He gestured to the bustling temporary kitchen. It showed everyone what this place is really about. "It's not just a job." I swallowed hard against the lump in my throat. "Thank you for everything." That afternoon, while directing the final assembly of the Perlman wedding displays, I received a text from an unknown number. "Check behind the loose brick in the basement wall left of the old coal chute. H." It took me a moment to realize H was Harold, my grandfather. The message had to be from someone who knew him well. I called Aunt Patricia. "I found a letter when clearing out his apartment," she explained. "He left instructions to text you that message 1 month after his death. I'm a little early, but given the circumstances." As soon as I could get away, I returned to the bakery. The basement was still damp from the flooding, but the area near the old coal chute had remained relatively dry. It took some searching, but eventually I found it. A brick that moved slightly when pressed. Behind it was a waterproof container holding a small leather-bound book and an envelope with my name. The book wasn't Grandpa's recipe journal that James had stolen. It was something far more valuable. A complete archive of every recipe he'd ever created, including detailed notes on technique origins and special instructions. The recipes that had made Wilson's famous, preserved in his careful handwriting, protected from those who might exploit them. The letter brought tears to my eyes. "My dear Rebecca, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've likely encountered the resistance I anticipated. Your brother has always wanted what he couldn't have, and your parents have always enabled him. They may try to take this bakery from you through means fair or foul. Remember that buildings can be replaced, equipment repaired, even recipes recreated, but the heart and soul you bring to baking cannot be stolen or duplicated. That's why I chose you. In this book are all my secrets, including some recipes I've never shared with anyone. Use them wisely. And remember what I always told you, bread is patience made visible. The same is true of justice. With love and faith in you, Grandpa Harold. P.S. Look in the safe behind my office portrait. The combination is your birthday. The safe contained legal documents I hadn't known existed, additional copyright protections for key recipes filed years ago by Grandpa photos, documenting his development process for signature items, and most surprisingly, a detailed business succession plan with my name on it dating back 5 years. He hadn't made a hasty decision in his final months. He'd been planning this transition for years, quietly documenting his intention. Armed with these discoveries and bolstered by newfound allies, I finally felt ready to truly fight back against James's schemes. The bakery, Grandpa's legacy, wouldn't just survive, it would thrive. The morning after discovering Grandpa's hidden recipe archive, I gathered my newly solidified team in George's son's kitchen. The Perlman wedding had been a triumph. The bride in tears, the good kind over her dream cake guests raving about the pastries, and the father of the bride slipping me his card with a note to call him about investing in our inevitable expansion. None of them would have guessed we'd created everything in an emergency backup kitchen after a disaster. But the temporary victory wouldn't secure our future. It was time to develop a comprehensive strategy to protect Wilson's sweet traditions for the long term. I'd spent half the night planning, fueled by equal parts determination, and Grandpa's special double espresso blend. First priority, I announced spreading architectural plans across the work table, securing the physical bakery. I pointed to areas marked in red. The plumber confirmed the pipe was deliberately damaged. Someone with knowledge of the building's layout targeted the exact spot that would cause maximum damage with minimum evidence. We're installing a state-of-the-art security system with motion sensors, cameras covering every angle, and a direct line to the security company. Martin nodded approvingly. What about access? Complete overhaul. New locks on every door and window. Keypad entry with individual codes for each staff member so we know exactly who enters and when. No more spare keys floating around. Good, George said. What about recipes and intellectual property? I patted the waterproof case containing Grandpa's recipe archive. Sarah is filing for comprehensive trademark and copyright protection on everything in this book. James may have stolen one journal, but this contains the complete collection, with Grandpa's dated notes proving he developed these recipes decades ago. And our supply chain issues, asked Luis, who had been dealing with the headaches of redirected orders and canceled deliveries. I've spoken personally with every vendor. They now have written confirmation that only authorized purchase orders with my signature or Martin's are valid. Any other inquiries should be reported directly to me. I smiled. Ryan from Bergman's Chocolate actually apologized for being taken in by James. They're sending us a complimentary case of their premium Belgian dark as a goodwill gesture. The meeting continued, each team member contributing ideas for strengthening our position. Donna suggested a customer loyalty program that would incentivize regulars to keep coming despite James's attempts to lure them away. Luis proposed partnering with local farmers for specialty ingredients we could market as uniquely ours. Martin recommended modernizing our ordering system to improve efficiency without changing the traditional production methods that made our products special. With the immediate security concerns addressed, we moved to Phase 2 community engagement. Mia's initial video had shown the power of transparency and storytelling. We decided to lean into that approach, creating a series highlighting the bakery's history, Grandpa's journey, and the traditional techniques that set our products apart. People don't just want good bread, I explained. They want to feel connected to its story, to be part of something authentic in a world of mass production. That's what James doesn't understand and can't replicate, the soul of this place. The strategy was taking shape, but I knew we needed to address the most difficult element, the legal battle with my family. Sarah Chen had already filed for an injunction against James using the Wilson name for his competing bakery, but that was just the beginning. "I've got news on that front," I told the team. Sarah discovered James has been approaching our largest accounts, not just undercutting our prices, but making claims that Wilson's Sweet Traditions is going out of business, and that he's the legitimate heir to the Wilson baking tradition. George frowned. "That's crossing a line from competitive to illegal." "Exactly. Sarah's preparing cease and desist letters, but we need to move quickly to reassure our major clients." I detailed our plan for personal visits to our top 20 accounts, bringing samples of our newest creations, along with documentation of our stability and commitment. As the meeting concluded, I felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. We were fighting back on multiple fronts, securing our physical space, protecting our intellectual property, strengthening our market position, and addressing the legal challenges. It was overwhelming but also energizing to take proactive steps rather than merely reacting to James's attack. That afternoon, the first test of our new security measures came sooner than expected. I was supervising the installation of new ovens in the partially restored bakery when the security company called. Someone had attempted to enter using an old key, triggering the new alert system. The security footage showed James looking surprised and then angry when his key no longer worked, trying to peer through the papered-over windows before stalking away. 2 days later, Sarah's legal maneuvers bore fruit. The court granted a temporary restraining order, preventing James from entering the bakery premises or contacting our staff directly. More significantly, he was prohibited from using Wilson's in his business name in a way that could create market confusion, effectively forcing him to rebrand before he'd even officially launched. The next challenge came from my parents. They requested a meeting through their lawyer, suggesting a family reconciliation to resolve the disputes amicably. Sarah advised caution. "This could be genuine, or it could be an attempt to get you to make concessions outside the legal process," she warned. "If you go, I'm coming with you, and we're not agreeing to anything without proper documentation." The meeting, held in a neutral conference room downtown, was tense from the start. My parents seemed genuinely shocked when I arrived with Sarah, as if they'd expected to easily persuade me without legal representation. James sat stiffly beside their lawyer, a stern man named Howard Grayson, who specialized in contesting wills. "We're concerned about the direction this family conflict is taking," my father began. "Legal actions, restraining orders. This isn't how the Wilsons handle disagreements." "I agree," I replied calmly. "Sabotaging, plumbing, stealing recipe books, and falsely claiming ownership of a business aren't how Wilsons should handle disagreements either. Yet here we are." My mother sighed dramatically. "Rebecca, nobody sabotaged anything. Buildings have maintenance issues. As for the recipe book, those are family recipes. James has as much right to them as you do." Actually, Sarah interjected, "those recipes are intellectual property belonging to Wilson's Sweet Traditions, which is solely owned by Rebecca. And we have documentation of Mr. James Wilson claiming to be the owner of said business to suppliers, clients, and potential employees, claims that constitute fraud." Howard Grayson cleared his throat. "We're prepared to discuss a settlement that would allow both parties to move forward. James would refrain from using specific Wilson family recipes and modify his business name to avoid confusion. In exchange, Rebecca would provide financial compensation for James's lost inheritance." "Financial compensation," I repeated incredulously. "For what Grandpa left the bakery to me legally in a properly executed will. James has no claim to lost inheritance. Your grandfather's decision has caused significant damage to your brother," my father argued. "He spent years preparing to take over the business, only to have it snatched away at the last minute." "Preparing how?" "By rarely visiting, by criticizing Grandpa's methods, by having no actual baking experience, by obtaining a business degree," my mother countered. by developing marketing plans, by thinking about the bakery's future rather than clinging to outdated traditions. The meeting deteriorated from there, with James eventually losing his composure and revealing his true feelings. "You've always been Grandpa's pet project," he snapped, following him around, hanging on his every word while the rest of us were expected to achieve on our own merit. "I worked for everything I got while you had the path cleared for you." His outburst was revealing. This wasn't just about the bakery as a business opportunity. It was about resentment that had festered for decades, jealousy of the special relationship I'd shared with Grandpa. For the first time, I felt a flicker of compassion for James, even as I remained resolute in defending what was rightfully mine. The meeting ended without resolution, but it clarified something important: this conflict wouldn't be resolved through compromise. My family wasn't interested in finding middle ground. They wanted capitulation. The following week brought a breakthrough I hadn't anticipated. During the security system installation, the technicians discovered a small digital recording device hidden in Grandpa's old office. It had been placed to capture private conversations about bakery business. When analyzed by Sarah's digital forensics expert, several recordings contained James's voice planning various forms of sabotage with an unidentified accomplice. "This changes everything," Sarah said, examining the transcript. "We have clear evidence of criminal behavior, not just civil infractions. We can take this to the police." I hesitated, the implications of pursuing criminal charges against my own brother sinking in. Despite everything, the thought of seeing James arrested was deeply unsettling. "Let's hold this in reserve," I decided. "First, I want to confront my parents with this evidence. They need to see exactly what they've been enabling." I arranged to meet my parents alone, no lawyers, no James, at their home. I brought copies of the security footage, the recording transcripts, and documentation of James's various attempts to sabotage the bakery. As they reviewed the evidence in silence, the color drained from my mother's face. My father removed his glasses, repeatedly cleaning them, as if better vision would somehow change what he was seeing. "I don't understand," my mother finally whispered. "Why would he do these things?" "Because you taught him he could," I answered, not unkindly. "You taught him that his ambitions mattered more than other people's work, that he deserved whatever he wanted, regardless of whether he'd earned it. And when he didn't get his way, you helped him try to take it by force instead of accepting Grandpa's decision." My father looked older than I'd ever seen him. "What happens now?" "That depends on you," I said. "I have enough evidence here for criminal charges, but I'd rather find another way forward if possible." I laid out my terms. They would stop financing James's competing bakery. They would acknowledge publicly that Wilson's Sweet Traditions was legitimately mine, and they would respect boundaries I was establishing around bakery business. In exchange, I wouldn't pursue criminal charges against James, though the civil legal actions would continue. They agreed, shell-shocked by the revelations. As I left, my mother caught my arm. "Rebecca the First," she struggled with words. "We really thought we were being fair. We never imagined James would do something like this." I looked at her sadly. "You never imagined it because you never wanted to see who he really is. Grandpa saw us both clearly. That's why he made the choice he did." With my family neutralized, if not reconciled, I returned to the bakery with renewed focus on our positive strategies. The Heritage Week celebration was in full swing, with lines stretching down the block for Grandpa's original recipes. Our new website featured the history of Wilson's Sweet Traditions, complete with vintage photos and stories from longtime customers. Local media covered our Phoenix-like recovery from the flooding, emphasizing the community support that had rallied around us. And in Grandpa's office wall safe opened with the combination he'd left me my birthday. As he'd hinted, I discovered one final gift, a comprehensive business plan for Wilson's Sweet Traditions, updated annually until just before his death. It detailed modernization opportunities that preserved traditional methods, potential expansion, locations, and even notes about which staff members showed particular promise for future leadership. The last page contained a handwritten note, Rebecca. A bakery isn't just about recipes, it's about relationships. You understand that better than anyone. Trust your instincts, but never stop learning. I'll be watching proudly from wherever I am. Grandpa H. Armed with Grandpa's wisdom and our team's determination, Wilson's Sweet Traditions wasn't just surviving, it was preparing to thrive for another generation. 6 weeks after the flooding incident, Wilson's Sweet Traditions had fully reopened, stronger than before. The bakery gleamed with strategic upgrades. New energy-efficient ovens that maintained the exact heat distribution. Grandpa's recipes required a redesigned display area that better showcased our creations while preserving the vintage aesthetic, and a small cafe corner where customers could enjoy their purchases with specialty coffee blends. Our Traditions and Transformations video series had developed a devoted following, with viewers from across the country requesting shipping options for our most popular items. The Heritage Week celebration had evolved into a monthly feature highlighting different aspects of the bakery's history and innovations. Business was better than ever, which made the news of Wilson Family Baking opening across town all the more irritating. Despite the court's restrictions on using the Wilson name in a way that created market confusion, James had found a loophole. By positioning his new bakery as a separate branch of a Wilson family baking tradition, rather than claiming direct connection to Grandpa's original business, he'd managed to skirt the letter of the injunction while violating its spirit. It's legally defensible if ethically questionable, Sarah admitted when I called her. We can fight it, but it would mean another round of expensive litigation with no guaranteed outcome. I decided to focus on our own success, rather than James's attempts to piggyback on our reputation. That strategy worked well until Bergman Hotels, our largest wholesale client responsible for nearly 20% of our revenue, called to schedule an urgent meeting. We've received a very competitive bid from Wilson Family Baking, explained Marcus Bergman, the third-generation owner of the hotel chain. Substantially lower prices for what appears to be very similar products. I wanted to discuss this with you directly before making any decisions given our long history. My heart sank. Losing the Bergman account would be a significant blow, not just financially but reputationally. Other clients would likely follow if Bergman switched suppliers. I appreciate your loyalty, Marcus, I said, maintaining my professional composure despite the internal panic. May I ask what specifically they're offering? He slid a proposal across the table. James had not only undercut our prices by nearly 30%, but had promised custom items based on original Wilson family recipes. The proposal included photos of products that looked remarkably similar to our signature items, close enough to create the impression of equivalence, while avoiding outright copyright infringement. I understand you need to make business decisions, I said after reviewing the document, but I'd like to make my case for why Wilson's Sweet Traditions remains your best option despite the higher cost. I outlined the quality difference in ingredients. Our continued use of European butter with higher fat content, locally sourced organic flour, and premium chocolate. I emphasized our reliability, decades of consistent quality and on-time delivery. And I highlighted our unique position in the Boston culinary landscape, the authentic connection to a beloved local institution that hotel guests specifically sought out. Your guests don't just want any pastry with their morning coffee, I concluded. They want an authentic Boston experience. That's what we provide, a taste of this city's history and culture in every bite. Marcus seemed thoughtful. I've always valued quality and authenticity, but this price difference is significant, Rebecca. I need to consider my bottom line too. I understand. Before you decide, I'd like to invite you to both bakeries. Taste the products side by side. See the operations firsthand. Then make your choice based on complete information. He agreed, and we set up a comparative tasting for the following week. I left feeling cautiously optimistic, but knew we needed to be exceptionally prepared. James would pull out all the stops for this presentation. Back at the bakery, I gathered the team to develop our strategy. We would create our absolute best versions of the items Bergman Hotels ordered most frequently, along with tasting notes highlighting the quality differences and the stories behind each recipe. Martin suggested including a tour of our production area so Marcus could see our methods firsthand, something James, with his hastily assembled operation, might be reluctant to offer. The day before the scheduled tasting, an unexpected visitor arrived at the bakery. James's assistant manager, a young woman named Zoe, whom he'd hired from a chain bakery operation. She looked nervous as she asked to speak with me privately. "I'm risking my job by coming here," she began once we were alone in my office. "But what's happening isn't right, and I can't be part of it anymore." She revealed that James had been cutting every possible corner to achieve his lower price points, using margarine instead of butter commercial premixes, rather than scratch ingredients and artificial flavors to mimic the depth that quality ingredients would naturally provide. More disturbingly, he had ordered staff to prepare special versions using premium ingredients exclusively for tastings and photography, while the actual production items used the cheaper alternatives. "For the Bergman tasting tomorrow, we've been prepping all week with the expensive ingredients," Zoe explained. "But the products that would actually be delivered if they sign the contract, completely different." I thanked her for her honesty and offered her a position at Wilson's if she needed one. She declined, explaining she'd already accepted a job at a bakery in Providence, but promised to provide a written statement about James's deceptive practices if needed. The morning of the Bergman tasting arrived with additional drama. I was preparing our presentation when Martin burst into the office looking alarmed. "Someone's trying to access our client database," he reported. "The IT company just called. There's been a sophisticated attempt to breach our new system within the last hour." The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. If James gained access to our detailed client information, pricing structures, order history's special requirements, he could target every major account with precision. Fortunately, the security measures we'd implemented after the flooding incident had helped. Marcus Bergman arrived precisely on time, accompanied by his head of purchasing and their executive chef. I led them through a structured tasting of our products, explaining the ingredients, techniques, and history behind each item. They seemed genuinely impressed, particularly by our signature sourdough, which used a starter Grandpa had maintained for over 50 years. "This is extraordinary," the executive chef commented, examining the perfect crumb structure. "You can't fake this kind of quality." After touring our production area, where the team demonstrated key techniques, we headed to James's new bakery across town. The contrast was immediately apparent. While his storefront was sleek and modern, the production area was chaotic and unwelcoming. James seemed reluctant to show the actual baking processes, focusing instead on his marketing plans and distribution efficiency. His products, while visually similar to ours, lacked the same depth of flavor and texture. The differences were subtle but noticeable to anyone paying attention. And Marcus Bergman was definitely paying attention. The situation reached its climax when Marcus asked a simple question: "Are these the exact same products and ingredients that would be delivered to our hotels under the proposed contract?" James hesitated just a fraction too long before answering. "Of course. We maintain consistent quality standards across all production." I couldn't help myself. "That's not what your assistant manager told me yesterday." The room went silent. James's face flushed with anger as I continued. She explained in detail how you use premium ingredients only for tastings and photography, while substituting cheaper alternatives for actual production. She was quite specific about the margarine instead of butter premixes, instead of scratch ingredients and artificial flavors to cut costs. "That's absurd," James sputtered. "She's obviously lying, probably because I had to discipline her for poor performance." "I have her signed statement," I replied calmly, along with purchase records, showing the minimal quantities of premium ingredients your bakery orders compared to the volume needed for your production levels. The numbers simply don't add up. Marcus Bergman looked between us, his expression hardening. "I value honesty above all else in business relationships, Mr. Wilson. If you're presenting products that differ from what you'd actually deliver, that's a serious breach of trust." "This is ridiculous," James protested. "Rebecca is obviously trying to sabotage my business because she can't compete on price. Actually, I can't match your prices precisely because I refuse to compromise on quality." I corrected him. "I respect our clients too much to deceive them." The meeting ended shortly after, with Marcus thanking both of us for our time while making no commitments. As we left, James pulled me aside, his expression a mixture of fury and desperation. "You've always had everything handed to you," he hissed. "Grandpa's attention, his praise, his bakery. Do you have any idea what it's like to always be second best in your own family?" For the first time, I saw beyond my anger to the hurt beneath James's actions. "I never had everything handed to me, James. I worked alongside Grandpa for years, learning every aspect of the business because I loved it, not because I expected to own it someday. The difference between us isn't that he loved me more. It's that I loved the bakery for what it was, not for what I could make it into." "Save your psychoanalysis," he snapped. "This isn't over. I still have one more card to play, and when I do, you'll wish you'd taken my buyout offer." His threat lingered as I returned to the bakery. What was this final card he planned to play? I didn't have to wait long to find out. 2 days later, during our busiest morning rush, health department officials arrived for a surprise inspection. The lead inspector informed me they'd received multiple reports of serious violations, including pest infestations and unsafe food handling practices. While I knew these allegations were false, I also knew that even the suggestion of health concerns could devastate a food business. Fortunately, our rigorous attention to cleanliness and proper procedures meant the inspection revealed no actual violations. But the damage to our reputation had already begun. James had apparently tipped off local gossip accounts about the inspection, and social media was buzzing with speculation. Just as we were dealing with this crisis, I received an urgent call from our largest wholesale client. "Rebecca, I've just been informed that all Wilson's Sweet Traditions products must be pulled from our shelves immediately due to potential health hazards," the purchasing manager said, clearly confused. "We received official-looking documentation claiming your recent inspection found dangerous violations." It became clear that James had sent fraudulent notices to our clients, impersonating health department communications. This crossed the line from unethical competition into criminal fraud. After consulting with Sarah, I made the difficult decision to contact the authorities. The investigation moved quickly. James's laptop contained drafts of the fake health department notices, along with a detailed plan for what he called Operation Bakery Takeover. By the time police arrived at his apartment with a warrant, he was attempting to delete evidence, a move that only strengthened the case against him. I took no pleasure in seeing my brother arrested, but his actions had left no alternative. The local newspaper covered the story with surprising sensitivity. "Family bakery dispute turns criminal, Wilson heir arrested for fraud and sabotage." My parents finally confronted with irrefutable evidence of James's criminal behavior seemed to age overnight. They made no attempt to justify his actions or pressure me to drop charges. Instead, they retreated into a shocked silence, processing the revelation that their favored child had gone so far beyond ethical boundaries. In the aftermath, Marcus Bergman called to confirm that Bergman Hotels would not only continue their contract with Wilson's Sweet Traditions, but would be expanding our partnership to include their new properties on the West Coast. "I value integrity," he explained simply. "Quality and honesty always win in the long run." As the legal process moved forward, I received a letter from James through his attorney. Unlike his previous communications, this one contained something approaching remorse. "Rebecca, I still believe Grandpa's decision was unfair, but my response was inexcusable. The humiliation of losing what I thought was my birthright clouded my judgment. I'm accepting a plea deal and getting the help I clearly need. Someday, I hope to earn back some measure of trust, though I understand if that's impossible. James." It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was an acknowledgement, the first step toward whatever healing might eventually be possible for our fractured family. 1 year to the day after Grandpa's funeral, I stood alone in Wilson's Sweet Traditions, before Don preparing his signature sourdough bread. The bakery was quiet, except for the soft hum of proofing cabinets and the occasional creak of the old building settling. Sunlight hadn't yet reached the windows, but the warm glow of our ovens cast familiar shadows across the walls where generations of Wilsons had practiced their craft. So much had changed in 12 months. The physical bakery had been transformed, repaired, renovated, and thoughtfully modernized while preserving its historic charm. We'd expanded our staff, added online ordering, and even opened a small satellite location in Cambridge near Harvard Square. Business was thriving beyond even Grandpa's optimistic projections. But the most significant changes weren't visible on any balance sheet. They were in the relationships that had been tested, broken, and in some cases cautiously rebuilt. James had served 4 months in a minimum security facility before being released on probation. Part of his plea agreement included restitution payments to the bakery and mandatory counseling. We hadn't spoken directly, but his therapist had reached out about the possibility of mediated reconciliation in the future. I wasn't ready yet, but I'd left the door open for when I might be. My parents had undertaken their own painful journey of self-reflection. After months of awkward distance, my mother had finally called her voice tight with emotion. "We failed both of you," she'd said. "We favored James because he seemed to need it more. You were always so capable, so sure of yourself. We thought you'd be fine without the extra attention, while James needed constant reassurance. But in doing that, we taught him the wrong lessons and took you for granted." It wasn't a complete healing, but it was a beginning. We'd started with small steps. Occasional dinners, careful conversations that avoided business discussions, gradual efforts to know each other as adults, rather than through the calcified patterns of our family roles. My father had been slower to come around his pride, making reconciliation more difficult. But last month he'd stopped by the bakery, unannounced awkwardly, offering to help install new shelving in the storeroom. We'd worked side by side for hours, conversation limited to practical matters. The right angle for a bracket, the proper spacing between supports. As he was leaving, he'd paused in the doorway. "You've done well, Rebecca," he'd said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Your grandfather would be proud." Coming from him, it was everything. Aunt Patricia had become a regular presence at the bakery, sometimes helping with administrative tasks, but more often simply enjoying the atmosphere and telling customers stories about Grandpa's early days. She'd moved into his old apartment above the shop, providing both security and a continuing family presence that customers appreciated. George Hamilton remained my most valued advisor, stopping by weekly to offer business insights and occasional gentle criticisms. Harold would have done that differently, he'd sometimes say with a wink before adding, but your way might be better for these times. Martin had been promoted to production manager, overseeing our expanded baking team with the same attention to detail and commitment to quality that had made him Grandpa's right hand for so many years. Under his guidance, we'd maintained our traditional methods while incorporating selective innovations that improved efficiency without compromising quality. The Perlman wedding crisis had turned into our greatest marketing success. The grateful bride had posted glowing reviews everywhere, emphasizing our commitment to customer satisfaction against all odds. Her father, true to his word, had become a minority investor in our Cambridge expansion, providing capital, while leaving operational control firmly in my hands. As I shaped the sourdough loaves, the same motions Grandpa had taught me decades ago, I reflected on the lessons of the past year. I'd learned about my own resilience, about the importance of chosen family alongside biological connections, about standing firm in the face of intimidation, while remaining open to healing and growth. I'd also learned that Grandpa had been right all along. A bakery wasn't just about recipes or techniques, profit margins, or market share. It was about relationships. With customers who marked their life milestones with our creations, with employees who poured their talents into each day's production, with suppliers who partnered in our commitment to quality, and with the community that had rallied around us when we needed support. After sliding the shaped loaves into the proofing cabinet, I walked to Grandpa's old office. My office now, though, I'd kept many of his touches intact. His favorite chair still sat behind the desk. His collection of antique rolling pins still lined the shelf above the window, and his portrait still hung on the wall opposite the door. I'd added my own elements too. Awards from local business associations, press clippings about our expansion, photos of our team at community events. From my desk drawer, I removed a small package wrapped in brown paper and twine, a loaf of Grandpa's signature sourdough bread made with his 70-year-old starter, which I maintained with religious care. It was time for my private ritual. The cemetery was peaceful in the early morning light dew still clinging to the grass as I made my way to Grandpa's grave. I sat on the small bench beside his headstone, unwrapping the bread and breaking off a piece. "We did it, Grandpa," I said softly, placing the piece of bread on his headstone. An old baker's tradition, he'd taught me, returning bread to the earth as a symbol of the cycle of nourishment. 1 year later, and Wilson's isn't just surviving, it's thriving. You chose right, even if it caused more drama than either of us anticipated. I told him everything. The business successes, the community support, the tentative family reconciliations. I described our new initiatives, including a scholarship program in his name for young bakers from disadvantaged backgrounds and a family legacy product line featuring his original recipes, with proceeds supporting local food security programs. "I miss you every day," I concluded, wiping away tears. "But I feel you in the bakery, in the recipes, in the routines, in the relationships you built. You created something that outlived you, something that continues to bring joy and nourishment to others. I can't think of a better legacy." As I walked back to the bakery, the eastern sky beginning to lighten with dawn, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since before Grandpa's death. The past year had taught me that family isn't defined by DNA, but by love and support, that legacy isn't about ownership, but about continuity and growth, and that sometimes the most painful challenges lead to the most meaningful transformations. Wilson's sweet traditions wasn't just my inheritance. It was my responsibility, my joy, and my future. With every loaf of bread, every customer interaction, every business decision, I was honoring not just Grandpa's memory, but his vision of what a family business could and should be. And as I opened the bakery doors to welcome the day's first customers, I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was exactly where I was meant to be. Have you ever experienced family conflict over an inheritance or business? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this tale of family drama and sweet revenge, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories. Share this video with someone who might need inspiration to stand their ground when facing unfair treatment from family members. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, sometimes the most important ingredients in any recipe are patience, perseverance, and staying true to yourself.